Greetings. Once again, I'm back in the improvised Bronx studio here. Good to be with you. Thanks for clicking on me. Thanks for visiting with me again. Tells me that you have enjoyed and profited from my efforts, and I'm glad to see that. Thank you. So yes, we have another in the My ARSE series. And you might be wondering, why so many My ARSE in your title? Somebody actually asked me that in the comments section of my last My ARSE video. He said, I don't see many holy men using that phrase, My ARSE. And I said, I replied, I said, you're right, I don't see it either. I guess it wasn't a Hebrew idiom. However, I do see Ismael being referred to by the angel of the Lord as a wild ass of a man. And I do see some rather colorful language in Ezekiel chapter 23, I believe it is, where Judah, the daughter Judah, or Obaliah, she's being compared to a woman who's lusting after some Egyptians who are described as having members like donkeys. And it actually goes into quite a bit more graphic detail. Also, if you look in Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, there's a compound Koine word there, which the KJV translators euphemistically called abusers of themselves with mankind. Well, if you examine the original Koine, you will see it's literally man screwers. And again, we could have a different compound word for that, can't we? Well, also in Philippians 3:8, the word that the KJV translated dung, well, in the Koine, that is the vernacular for another favorite four-letter word of ours in English. All that to say, the Bible is down to earth, and so am I. Sorry you were offended by the use of My ARSE. Actually, it's my homage to people who like the KJV, King James Version. That's the version of the Bible named after that witch hunting, witch torturing, witch executing bisexual James I of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That was the language they used in that day. So people who prefer that version, I use the word ARSE. Sorry. Anyway, all that to say, dubious translations and dubious doctrines are what the My ARSE series is all about. And we have another dubious translation today to add to the others that I've talked about this month. If you looked at some of my recent videos, I did Sin My ARSE. That's about Matthew 5:28, where the word woman should have been translated wife. Instead, it's translated woman, and everyone is thinking anyone who looks at an attractive woman for a second too long has sinned. Well, no, it's about lusting after other men's wives, not admiring attractive women. Another one, fornication, My ARSE. That's another one that has caused a lot of havoc, where people are thinking that the word translated fornication is talking about premarital sex. Actually, it's talking about the use of prostitutes. And it's also talking about idolatry. In fact, more often than not, it's talking about idolatry, especially Revelation. But we have holier than thou translators back then and now who prefer this catch-all English word fornication. And they want to tell you that people who have been living together for 10 years in a monogamous, long-term sexual relationship are fornicating. Well, they're not. No. Actually, they're just married without the benefit of a legal license, which they didn't have in biblical times. So we can't try to out-holy the biblical writers or speakers. Not good. This, again, is where we get the My ARSE series. We have dubious translations and dubious doctrines which are wreaking havoc in the body of Christ. and they've caused all kinds of obnoxious, pernicious cults. For example, Calvinism, free grace, all based on dubious translations, especially of this verb that I'm going to talk about tonight, and noun, which gets translated unbelief. All right, so I want to show you an example that more often than not, this verb, this noun, gets translated unbelief. It's talking about being unfaithful, not incredulous. That's a big difference because faithful implies works, doesn't it? There's that dirty word again, works. Yes, human effort is implied by unfaithful or faithful. And that's why they translated these Koine words belief, believer, unbeliever. Well, I am saying unbelief my arse. And I got the perfect passage to prove to you why I'm right about that. Stand by. And here it is. This is from Mark chapter 9, verses 17 through 29. It is the story of the child that the father brings to Jesus. The child is filled with demons, and the father is begging Jesus' help to free his child from these demons. Now, this pericope is found also in Luke chapter 17, I believe, and Matthew chapter, could be Luke chapter 9. I have to double check that. But I know it's also found in Matthew chapter 17. I will double check to see where it's found in Luke. I believe it could be also chapter 9, as in Mark. In any case, this story is found in all three synoptic gospels. And it's important to this study because the words faithless and unbelief are used. And again, we have to really understand what's being talked about here. Is credence the issue, or is fidelity the issue? Because that has a lot to do, that has a lot to say about our own current debates. If it's all about belief, well, then the free grace people have a leg to stand on. But if it's all about fidelity, then all those sects that deal with species of easy believism, which include free grace and also Calvinism, these are wrong, terribly wrong. So let's have a look at this and see what it's talking about. All right. So the scene is this. Jesus has just been on the Mount of Transfiguration, where he met with Moses and Elijah, and disciples have now met him below. A couple of the disciples went up to that mountain with him. Jesus comes back down the mountain, and there's a big crowd around. And verse 17 says, and one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. In other words, it's making him unable to speak. And wheresoever he taketh him, he teareth him, and he foameth and gnasheth with his teeth and pineth away. And I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. He answereth him and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him unto me. Let's have a look at this, verse 19 here. He answereth him and said, O faithless generation. What's he talking about, faithless? Is he talking about people who are skeptics? Or is he talking about people who are unfaithful to their Messiah, to their King, to their God? I would say the latter. He's talking about people who are being unfaithful to the King, to the authority, to him. He answered and said, O faithless generation. Not people who are exercising their critical faculties too much, not a bunch of skeptics, but people who are not submitted to proper authority. The KJV renders this adjective, oh, faithless, so it's ambiguous. However, if you look in Luke chapter 12, verse 46, where there's the parable of the faithful steward, it's very clear that this same word, this same adjective, apistos, G571, it's talking about someone who's being faithful to a master and someone who is disobeying him. So the same word here is in Mark 9 and verse 19. And so I think Jesus is talking about people who are not properly obedient, not people who are thinking too much. Remember, he hasn't gone to the cross yet. The most that can be believed is that he's a miracle worker. Okay, so was he going to condemn them for not believing that he's a great magician? No, it's not talking about belief. It's talking about fidelity. Verse 20. And they brought him, the demon-possessed boy, unto him. And when he, Jesus, saw him, straightway the spirit tear him. And he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming. And he asked his father, Jesus asked the father, how long is it ago since this came unto him? And he, the father, said, of a child. Let's go down to verse 22. And oft times it hath cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Okay, so the father's begging for help for Jesus. The disciples of Jesus could not cast out this dumb spirit. Jesus says unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible. To him that believe, let's do it again. Jesus said unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. This is the way the KJV translated. If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. Well, believe is only in the original text one time, and that's at the end, and the verb. This word that they translated canst believe, it's a verb, dyne, D-Y-N-E, G1410. It's translated have power. It's the root from where we get dynamite, have power. So it's a mistranslation. It's an agenda-driven mistranslation, I might add. Jesus said unto him, if thou canst believe. No, Jesus said unto him, if you are able, if you can, all things are possible to him that believeth. But believe what? There's no content here to believe. No, to him that gives faith. This verb here in verse 23, translated believeth, this stuante, okay, it's in the present participle active tense. It means it's an ongoing action. This verb, G4100, is derived from the noun pistis, G4102. I've said this before. G4102, that noun has two distinct meanings depending on the context. It's either talking about fidelity or it's talking about belief in the sense of confidence in something. So you have, just as the verb can mean either credence or it's talking about giving allegiance. In this context, remember what he said above, oh, faithless generation. In this case, it's talking about giving allegiance. So Jesus is saying in verse 23, if you can give faith, all things are possible to him that gives allegiance. He's not talking about credence. He's talking about allegiance. He's the Messiah. We forget this all the time. We think Jesus is our shoulder to cry on. He's the King of Kings. And he's saying if you give him faith, you give him fidelity, all things are possible. This is confirmed. My exegesis of 23 is confirmed by what we read in 24. Let's look at this. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief. Again, the verb, pistuo, G4100, derived from the noun G4102. Apistia, unbelief. Again, it's the same thing in Luke 12. The same, this is the noun. Luke 12 is talking about the unbelievers. The adjective is 571. The noun is 570. This is talking about unfaithfulness. I'll put this down for a moment here. This is one of the most confusing verses we've ever, because of the mistranslation, it is quite confusing to a lot of people. I'll put it down for a moment. Lord, I believe. Help me, my unbelief. Now, I've heard pastors preach on this verse. Lord, I believe. Help me, my unbelief. And some of them will start talking about, well, you know, we all have our doubts, and you got to help me, Lord, through my doubts. No, that's not what it's talking about. This is what happens when Calvin freaks and Lutherans translate the word, and that's what they did with the King James Version. We have devotees of Jihad Johnny Calvin and Martin Luther translating the Koine. We want to think that our doctrines come from the scriptures. I wish that were the case. Truth is, in many cases, our doctrines were put into the scriptures. And this is a good case in point. Lord, I believe. Help me with my unbelief. Well, that makes zero sense, doesn't it? If I believe, why do I need your help with my unbelief? No, it's not talking about credence. It's talking about faithfulness. This man here, who just heard Jesus say above, I believe it was verse 19, Jesus said, "Oh, faithless generation." In other words, you people who are rebellious. Well, the man who's got the demon-possessed child, he's saying, I'm giving faith. I give you faith. Help me with my unbelief. What he's saying is either help me with my past infidelity or help me with my community's infidelity, that community, that generation that you just condemned for being unfaithful. Don't look at that. Look at my faithfulness to you now. That's what he's saying. Let's return to the text. Yes, straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. I give you faith. Help thou mine unbelief. Forgive me for being unfaithful in the past. All right. So, verses 25 through 27, Jesus casts out the demon. Now, this is afterwards. Verse 28. And when he was come into the house, Jesus, his disciples asked him privately, why could not we cast him out? We go on to verse 29. Down below here in Mark, we will get to that. But there's a part that Mark's gospel leaves out, which Matthew's includes, and I'm going to include it in this presentation. Matthew 17:20, in the parallel version. And Jesus said unto them, because of your unbelief. And this adjective here, aligo pistos, it means your small amount of faith. But verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. So what is Jesus criticizing here? Is he saying you people just haven't suspended your disbelief well enough? No. He's saying you're not faithful enough to me. You haven't been loyal enough to me. That's why you couldn't cast out the demon. You didn't have any authority because you're not sold out to me the way you need to be to have power in me. That's how you have power if you're sold out. Okay? A lego pistos, a little faith, a little faithfulness. I say to you, if you have faith, and this faith here is not a verb talking about mental activity, it's talking about fidelity. This same underlying word that gets translated faith here in Matthew 17:20, pistin, that's the transliteration of it. This now in Titus 2:10, it's translated fidelity. It's the same word, spelt the same way. And in Titus 2:10, it is translated fidelity. So Jesus is saying if you have the faithfulness, the smallest amount of faithfulness even, you're going to say to a mountain, this is hyperbole, of course, go over there and it'll be done. All things are possible if you have fidelity to him, if you're sold out to him. And he said unto them, this is how it concludes, this kind of demon can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. Yes, also with fidelity. Without that, you're not casting it out. Put it down. Okay, so again, this is another case where the Calvitarded and the Lutholidist translators went with ambiguous words like faith and belief. No, it's actually talking about fidelity. Jesus's disciples could not cast the demon out of this man's son because they hadn't been faithful enough to him. As we're going to see later on in the Gospels, they're all going to run away from him after he's arrested, remember? So yeah, they were not entirely sold out. They were not entirely faithful. So they couldn't help the man with the demon-possessed son. And that's what Jesus is trying to explain to them. You have to be totally faithful to me. And if we don't get that here, if we think it's all about credence, well, we're wrong too. It's not about credence. Again, he said, if you have the faith, the fidelity of a mustard seed, just a little bit of consistency, truth, you'll be able to do anything with me. But they were double-minded. His disciples were double-minded. They were not entirely sold out to Jesus, and that's why they couldn't help that man's son. So once again here, unless you see, I've said this before in other videos, unless you see the content of the belief, unless you can tell what he's talking about, what exactly does he want you to believe? Forget it. He's not talking about belief. Same thing when you see the noun or the adjective that gets translated faith. In many cases, it's talking about fidelity, faithfulness. And again, if you don't see what it is that you're supposed to believe, it's not about that. It's talking about faithfulness to King Jesus. Again, he's a political figure, highly controversial one. He's not just your shoulder to cry on. He's the King of Kings. Belief, my ARSE. Faithfulness is what is being spoken of. And yes, that involves that dirty word, works, human works. And that's what Jesus says we're going to be judged by. He said that in Matthew 16:27. He said it in Revelation 22:12. And he talks about that in John 5:28-29. You're going to be judged by what you do, not by what you believe. And you can believe that. Have a nice night, everyone.